Do you ever think about the childhood dinners we still crave from the 1960s and feel that pull from a time long gone? These dinners once shaped the evenings that brought families together around the same table. What slipped away with them that we did not notice at the time? Meatloaf with ketchup glaze was the kind of weeknight classic that held families together without anyone realizing it at the time. Grandparents and parents would mix ground meat with breadcrumbs, onions, and whatever seasoning lived in the spice cabinet, shaping it into a loaf that somehow always came out the same, no matter who made it. Then came the glaze, that sweet layer of ketchup spread across the top in thick strokes that caramelized in the oven until it turned sticky, glossy, and just a little smoky around the edges. The smell filled the whole house long before dinner was served, drifting down hallways and under bedroom doors like a promise you could count on. Cutting into the loaf felt almost ceremonial, each slice holding that perfect balance of soft inside and crisp outside. Kids would poke at it, drizzle more ketchup over it, and still come back for seconds without hesitation. It was affordable, dependable, and tasted like routine in the best way. Even today, people crave it because it reminds them of a dinner table where nothing was fancy but everything felt secure. That ketchup glaze was never gourmet, but it was warm, familiar, and a taste memory glued firmly to childhood. Fish sticks and crinkle-cut fries were the kind of dinner kids begged for, the unofficial meal of busy weeknights when the adults were too tired to fuss. The moment that frozen box hit the counter, excitement followed, because everyone knew dinner would be fast and crispy, and exactly the kind of food children believed counted as a celebration. The fish sticks went into the oven in neat rows, sizzling as the breading crisped while the fries baked beside them, each crinkle catching just enough salt to make them addictive. It was not fancy seafood, not even close, but to a child it tasted like the best thing the freezer aisle had ever made. There was comfort in the uniformity, the predictability, the way dipping sauces always turned the plate into a tiny adventure. Adults liked it because it filled everyone up without much effort. Kids loved it because it tasted like freedom and fun. Even now, biting into a fish stick can take you straight back to a living room floor covered in toys, a television playing too loudly, and a plate balanced on your knees. It was cheap, easy, and unforgettable. Baked ham with pineapple rings was the kind of sweet, savory centerpiece that made Sundays feel like holidays, even when nothing special was happening. Families would take a modest cut of ham, stud it with cloves, and layer pineapple rings on top, letting the juice drip down the sides as it baked until the whole kitchen smelled warm and sticky. The ham itself was simple and affordable, but the pineapple transformed it, turning an ordinary meal into something festive and bright. Watching the fruit caramelize in the oven felt like watching a tradition unfold, one that had been passed through so many hands that it no longer belonged to anyone in particular. Kids loved the sweetness, adults loved the nostalgia, and everyone loved the way the table suddenly felt fuller with that ham sitting in the center. Slices were served thick or thin, usually with mashed potatoes or bread on the side, soaking up all the extra glaze. Even now, people remember that taste because it felt like an occasion, something that meant family was gathered and everything was calm. It was a dish that stretched across decades, bringing people back to simpler times every time it reappeared. Sweet pea and potato casserole was one of those gentle, unassuming dishes that fed families through tight budgets and busy lives. It came together from pantry staples, canned peas, diced potatoes, a bit of cream or broth, and whatever seasoning happened to be nearby. Once baked, it softened into a creamy, comforting dish that tasted like warmth itself. It was not bold, not spicy, not dramatic, but it did not need to be. It was the kind of food that sat quietly on the table, filling plates and stomachs without fanfare. Kids often pushed peas around their plates only to realize, bite by bite, that the casserole actually tasted pretty good. Adults appreciated that it stretched ingredients far enough to feed everyone while still feeling whole. It tasted like a memory of soft kitchen light and evenings that moved slowly. Even now, there is something deeply soothing about the simplicity of peas and potatoes baked together, reminding people that comfort does not need to be complicated. Fried pork chops with apples was the kind of dinner that felt hearty and homelike even when money was tight. The pork chops were coated lightly or simply seasoned, then fried until golden brown, sending up smells that wrapped themselves around the walls and furniture. Apples were sliced thin and cooked down until they softened into a warm, sweet topping that balanced the savory richness of the meat. It was a pairing that felt natural, almost inevitable, like something families had been making long before recipes were written down. Adults loved how filling it was. Kids loved the sweetness of the apples, and everyone loved how it turned an ordinary night into something comforting. It was the type of dish you remembered without even trying to remember it. It filled the house, filled the plate, and filled the moment with a kind of steady warmth only the 1960s kitchen could produce. Macaroni and stewed tomatoes was a surprisingly tangy, humble dish that stretched every ingredient just a little further, making it a popular staple in the 1960s kitchen. Elbow macaroni boiled until tender was mixed with tomatoes stewed down until they turned soft and slightly sweet, creating a flavor that was simple yet strangely satisfying. It did not pretend to be anything fancy. It was a dish for busy parents, hungry kids, and anyone needing comfort without cost. The tang from the tomatoes mixed with the soft macaroni in a way that stuck in your memory long after childhood passed. Some families topped it with a bit of cheese, some kept it plain, but either way, it tasted warm and familiar, like a weeknight that ended well. It was a dish defined not by extravagance but by reliability, something people still crave because it feels like stepping back into a kitchen where everything was steady and safe. Pot roast with carrots and onions was the Sunday ritual that made the whole house smell like home before you even opened your eyes. The roast went into a heavy pot early in the day, searing first before settling into a long simmer with onions, carrots, and maybe a potato or two. Hours passed, the aroma grew richer, and by evening the meat was tender enough to fall apart under the slightest pressure. This was not just a meal, it was a gathering point, a reason for everyone to show up at the table. The vegetables soaked up the broth, turning sweet and soft, and the whole pot felt like comfort poured into a single dish. People still crave it because it tasted like stability, like being cared for, like the end of a long week wrapped neatly in gravy. Breaded veal patties were once a diner favorite that found steady homes in 1960s kitchens, served with gravy and mashed potatoes like something straight off a lunch counter menu. Families bought them because they were inexpensive, easy to cook, and tasted tender once fried and covered in gravy. The breading gave them a crisp exterior, while the inside stayed soft and mild, making them a hit with children who had not yet learned to love stronger flavors. The dish felt comforting, reliable, and just hearty enough to end a long day right. Even though they appear less often today, many people still crave that nostalgic taste because it reminds them of childhood dinners served hot on plates that clattered slightly when set on the table. There was something reassuring about the whole routine, from hearing the sizzle of the patties in the pan to watching the gravy bubble as it thickened. It was a kind of dinner that did not require fuss or stress, only a warm pan, a steady hand, and the quiet instinct of someone who cooked from memory instead of recipes. Those veal patties were proof that simple food could feel like a feast when shared at a table filled with familiar voices and everyday conversation. Chicken pot pie, whether frozen from the store or made from scratch at home, felt like a small luxury in the 1960s kitchen. The golden crust, flaky and warm, opened up to a creamy filling of chicken, peas, and carrots that tasted far richer than its price. Kids treated it like a special treat, watching steam rise as the crust cracked open. Parents appreciated that it fed everyone without requiring much work, especially on colder evenings. It was a dish that felt celebratory even on ordinary days, and for many, that bubbling filling remains one of the strongest edible memories from childhood. The smell alone made the house feel cozier, like the walls were holding in a little more warmth than usual. Families often gathered around the table a bit faster when pot pie was involved, eager for that first spoonful that blended soft vegetables with tender chicken. Even now, one bite can bring back entire scenes from the past, the kind lit by soft kitchen lights and the hum of a quiet night settling in. Hot dogs and pork and beans were the kind of quick dinner families relied on when nights were too busy for anything else. The beans simmered until they thickened, turning sweet and smoky, while sliced hot dogs added enough salt and substance to make the whole meal feel complete. It was simple, cheap, and surprisingly satisfying, the kind of dinner kids hurried toward when they heard the can opener turning. It tasted like television nights, homework half done, and the comfortable chaos of family life. Even now, people crave it because it brings back a feeling of uncomplicated joy. The flavor was familiar and predictable in the best way, a warm little bowl that asked nothing of you except to sit down and enjoy it. Parents liked that it came together in minutes, and kids liked that it felt like a treat, even though it was one of the easiest meals in the house. It was a dish woven into weeknights, routines, and the small moments that ended long days with something warm and steady. Cubed steak with brown gravy was one of those dinners that looked humble on the plate but tasted like it came straight from a diner counter. Families bought cubed steak because it was cheap and already tenderized, those little grid marks pressed into the meat like a promise that it would cook up soft if you treated it right. Into the skillet it went, browning just enough to build flavor before gravy was poured over the top and allowed to simmer until everything thickened and softened together. The smell alone could pull kids away from their cartoons. The meat soaked up the gravy soaked up the flavor from the meat, and together they made a dish that begged to be served over mashed potatoes, letting every drop settle into the grooves. It was the kind of meal that made you sit down, slow down, and let the warmth spread through you. Parents liked it because it fed everyone without costing much, and kids liked it because it was soft, savory, and easy to love. Even today, people crave that plate because it tasted like steadiness, like being cared for, like a time when dinner felt like an anchor at the end of the day. Fried bologna steaks were the kind of dinner that proved you did not need expensive meat to feel like you were eating something special. Thick-cut slices of bologna hit the pan with a sizzle, curling at the edges as the heat transformed them from simple lunch meat into something smoky, savory, and downright irresistible. Families would score the edges so they stayed flat, pressing them down like a short-order cook working the grill at a busy diner. Once browned and sizzling, those slices went onto a plate beside potatoes or toast, turning an ordinary night into something that tasted hearty and satisfying. The smell drifted through the whole house, warm and salty and impossible to ignore. Kids loved watching the slices puff up, adults loved how far a single pack could stretch, and everyone loved how it tasted a lot fancier than it actually was. It was thrift done right, the kind that created a meal so memorable you still think about it decades later. No matter how simple the ingredients were, fried bologna steaks felt like real food, the kind of meal that told you everything was going to be okay. Shepherd's pie with creamed corn was one of those dinners that brought everyone to the table just by existing. Families layered it differently depending on what they had, but the pattern was always roughly the same. A savory meat base, a layer of creamed corn, and a cloud of mashed potatoes spread across the top like a soft, warm blanket. It baked into a bubbling, golden-topped dish that felt like comfort scooped straight from the oven. The creamed corn added sweetness and richness that balanced the meat perfectly, turning each bite into a blend of textures and flavors that tasted far more complicated than it really was. Kids loved digging through the layers, adults loved how far it could stretch when money was tight, and everyone loved how one pan could feed an entire family without anyone feeling shortchanged. It was a dish shaped by personality, by whatever seasonings happened to be nearby, by the quiet creativity of home cooking. Even now, people crave it because it represents a whole world of warmth, routine, and togetherness tucked beneath a layer of mashed potatoes. Spam and fried potatoes was the sort of meal that turned thrift into something craveable. Spam cubes hit the skillet with a hiss, browning into salty, crispy little bites that tasted far richer than their priced potatoes sliced thin and cooked alongside them soaked up every bit of flavor, turning golden at the edges and soft in the center. It was a skillet meal that came together fast, fed everyone well, and filled the house with a smell that was impossible to forget. Families made it because it was easy, cheap, and satisfying, but they kept making it because it tasted like home. The combination of textures, the crackle of the potatoes, and the deep savory bite of the Spam all worked together better than anyone expected. Kids saw it as a treat, adults saw it as practical, and everyone saw it as a kind of magic born from a can and a pan. Even today, people crave it because it tasted like childhood, like simpler times, and like pure comfort. Baked chicken legs with paprika were the kind of simple oven meal every family seemed to know by heart. The chicken legs were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a heavy dusting of paprika that turned the skin a deep red as it baked. They cooked low and slow, filling the house with that unmistakable smell of roasted chicken that drifted through every room. The skin crisped just enough, the meat stayed juicy, and the seasoning tasted familiar and warm. Families served it with mashed potatoes, rice, or whatever vegetable was around that week, but the chicken always stole the show. It was inexpensive, reliable, and delicious, the kind of dish that never tried too hard but always delivered. Kids grabbed it with both hands, adults savored the flavor, and everybody ended up licking their fingers. Even now, people crave that paprika-dusted chicken because it tasted like family, like evening routines, like the kind of homemade meal that anchors a childhood. Cream-chipped potatoes were a full dinner disguised as a side dish, something families made when the pantry was nearly empty, but the expectation of a warm meal still stood. Potatoes were sliced, boiled until just soft, then folded into a simple cream sauce that turned everything silky and comforting. It was not flashy or colorful, but it was filling, warm, and dependable. The sauce coated every piece, turning the dish into a milky, tender scoop of pure comfort that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Families served it on its own or with a biscuit or two, letting the potatoes carry the whole meal. Kids often underestimated it until they took a bite, only to realize how satisfying it was. Adults relied on it because it stretched ingredients beautifully. Even today, the memory of those creamy potatoes lingers because it was the kind of food that kept people going with nothing more than simplicity and care. Chicken rice bake with mushroom soup was the definition of a 1960s casserole, the kind of oven dish that tasted like pure warmth. Families mixed rice, bits of chicken, and canned mushroom soup into a single pan, letting it bake until everything softened into one creamy, savory blend. The rice absorbed the soup, the chicken added richness, and the whole dish came out bubbling and fragrant. It was easy, dependable, and perfect for nights when the goal was to feed many with little. Kids loved the creaminess, adults loved the simplicity, and everyone loved how the leftovers tasted even better the next day. It was not fancy, but it was comforting in a way no restaurant meal could match. Even today, people crave it because it tasted like being taken care of. Sloppy joes on soft white buns were the messy miracle of school nights everywhere. Ground beef simmered in a sweet, tangy sauce until it thickened into that unmistakable mixture that dripped out of the bun no matter how carefully you tried to hold it. The smell alone meant excitement because sloppy joes felt fun in a way few dinners did. Kids loved the chaos, parents loved the convenience, and everyone loved how satisfying it was. The softness of the bun, the sweetness of the sauce, the savory meat all came together in a way that still makes people nostalgic decades later. It was a dinner that tasted like childhood laughter, like sticky hands, like evenings where life felt uncomplicated and full. And there was always this unspoken ritual to it, the way families leaned over their plates to avoid dropping sauce everywhere and still managed to make a small mess anyway. That was part of the charm. Sloppy joes brought everyone to the table faster than anything else, and for a brief moment the whole house felt connected by something simple and warm. Beef and vegetable skillet hash was the solution to vegetables on their last day and bits of leftover meat waiting for a purpose. Everything went into the pan together, sizzling and browning until the kitchen smelled like something hearty and homey. The vegetables softened, the beef crisped around the edges, and the whole skillet turned into a savory patchwork of flavors. It was filling, flexible, and comforting, the kind of meal shaped entirely by what needed to be used up. Kids might pick through it, adults might appreciate it more, but everyone remembered it. Even now, people crave that skillet hash because it tasted like practicality done right. like the quiet work of making food last without sacrificing comfort. It was a dish that reflected the real rhythm of family life, a meal that came from instinct instead of recipes. You could hear the spatula scraping the pan and know dinner was close, know something warm and honest was about to land on your plate. It was thrift elevated by experience, and that is why it still lives in so many memories. Cabbage and smoked sausage skillet was one of those frugal dinners that surprised people with how flavorful it was. Cabbage wilted down into soft, sweet ribbons while smoked sausage browned and released enough richness to season the whole pan together. They created a dish that was savory, smoky, and unexpectedly comforting. It filled the kitchen with steam and scent, warming the room as much as the meal warmed the stomach. Families made it because it was cheap, filling, and impossible to mess up. Kids might wrinkle their noses at the cabbage, but one bite usually changed their minds. Even now, that combination of smoky sausage and tender cabbage pulls people right back to their childhood kitchens, to nights when dinner was simple but perfect. And there was something deeply grounding about the way it all came together in one skillet, as if the ingredients knew how to support each other without much help. The dish tasted like a quiet evening, like soft conversations drifting across a small kitchen table, like the kind of comfort that comes from meals built on tradition and resourcefulness. Fried haddock with tartar sauce was the Friday night ritual that made the end of the week feel special even when money was tight. Families bought haddock because it was affordable, mild, and easy to cook, the kind of fish even picky kids would eat without a fight. The fillets were dusted with flour or dipped in a simple batter, then lowered gently into hot oil where they crisped into a golden, flaky piece of comfort. The sound of frying filled the kitchen with the promise of something warm and satisfying. Tartar sauce, usually made from mayonnaise and chopped pickles, added a creamy tang that made the whole plate taste like a restaurant meal without the cost of going out. Kids loved how the crust crackled when they bit into it. Adults loved how reliable and filling it was after a long week. Sometimes it came with a side of coleslaw or potatoes, but the fish was always the star. The meal felt like a small celebration, a tiny break from the routine, something that said you made it through another week. Even now, people crave that simple plate because it carried a sense of comfort, tradition, and the steady rhythm of family life. Fried haddock dinners tasted like warmth, togetherness, and the peaceful feeling of a Friday evening that asked nothing more of you. Oven-baked meatballs with grape jelly sauce were one of those wonderfully strange creations that somehow tasted magical to a child in the 1960s. The meatballs started out ordinary enough, rolled from ground beef, breadcrumbs, and a splash of milk, then baked on a sheet until they browned at the edges. But the magic happened with the sauce, a glossy mixture of grape jelly and tomato-based ingredients that melted into something sweet, tangy, and strangely irresistible. The smell alone could pull kids into the kitchen to peek in the oven window, waiting for the moment the sauce began to bubble and thicken. The coating clung to each meatball, turning them into shiny bites of pure nostalgia. Adults appreciated how easy and inexpensive the dish was, while kids loved how the sweetness made dinner feel fun. It was the kind of meal that fit perfectly into potlucks, weeknights, and birthday parties, always earning empty plates and sticky fingers. Even today, people still crave that unexpected blend of flavors because it reminds them of a time when dinners did not need to make sense to be delicious. They just needed to feel joyful, familiar, and made with a little love. Peanut butter and banana sandwiches, warm or fried, were the quiet heroes of tight budget nights when families needed something filling, sweet, and comforting. Bananas were mashed or sliced, spread across bread with a thick layer of peanut butter that stuck to the roof of your mouth in the best possible way. Sometimes the sandwich was served cold, simple, and soft. Other nights it was placed in a skillet with a bit of butter and fried until the bread turned golden and the filling melted into a warm, gooey mixture that tasted almost like dessert. The smell of toasted bread and sweet banana drifted through the house, reminding everyone that a good meal did not have to be complicated. Kids devoured these sandwiches without realizing they were eating one of the most budget-friendly dinners imaginable. Adults appreciated how quickly they came together on nights when energy was low and money was stretched thin. Even now, People crave that comforting blend of nutty, creamy sweetness because it tastes like childhood kindness, like the soft end of a long day, like something made with care during tougher times. It was simple, warm, and unforgettable. Chicken and rice soup with saltines was the gentle dinner families turned to when someone was sick, tired, or simply needed a bowl of something soothing. The broth simmered with small bits of chicken, soft rice, celery, and carrots until everything blended into a warm, mild mixture that felt healing in every spoonful. Kids crumbled saltines over the top, watching them soften into the broth while adding just enough salt to wake up the flavor. The soup filled the house with a soft, comforting smell that signaled everyone to slow down. It was not a fancy meal, but it was one that carried emotional weight, something parents made with quiet intention. On cold nights, it warmed you from the inside out. On stressful days, it felt like a reset button. Even now, the memory of that simple soup can bring back the feeling of being wrapped in a blanket with the television humming softly in the background. It was the taste of gentleness, patience, and the kind of love that shows up in small, steady ways. Mashed potato pancakes were the kind of thrifty dinner that made last night's leftovers taste brand new again. Families mixed cold mashed potatoes with a little flour, egg, and seasoning, shaping them into patties that went straight into a hot skillet. As they browned, the edges crisped into a golden crust, while the inside stayed soft and creamy, a perfect contrast that made each bite feel special. The smell of frying potatoes curled through the kitchen, bringing everyone to the table before the first batch was even done. These pancakes were filling, inexpensive, and surprisingly fun to eat, especially for kids who loved anything they could pick up with their hands. Adults appreciated the practicality of turning leftovers into something delicious. The dish did not try to impress, but it always delivered comfort. Even today, people crave those warm, crispy pancakes because they carry the memory of simple meals served with quiet pride. They tasted like resourcefulness, familiarity, and the joy of discovering that leftovers could be just as good the second time around. Corned beef hash with a fried egg was the kind of hearty skillet meal families leaned on when they needed something filling that cooked fast. Corned beef crisped in the pan alongside diced potatoes, onions, and peppers until everything browned together in a savory, sizzling mixture. Then came the fried egg, placed on top with a soft, golden center that spilled gently into the hash with the first cut of a fork. The smell filled the house, earthy and rich, waking up appetites instantly. Kids liked mixing the egg into the potatoes, turning the whole plate into a warm, comforting mess. Adults liked how far a single can of corned beef could stretch. It was practical, reliable, and deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that kept everyone full and content. Even now, people crave that combination of crispy edges, soft potatoes, and rich egg because it tasted like weekend mornings, family chatter, and the simple goodness of skillet cooking. Baked ziti with tomato sauce was the pasta dish that made every kid feel like dinner just got exciting. Ziti noodles baked in a simple tomato sauce softened into a bubbling, cozy casserole that held warmth in every bite. Sometimes families added cheese, sometimes not, but either way the dish came out tasting like comfort, layered in all the right places. The edges browned just enough to add texture, while the center stayed soft and saucy. Kids loved diving into it, spoonful after spoonful, while adults loved how easy it was to make a large batch and stretch it across a whole table. It tasted like togetherness, like busy nights made easier, like a small gift wrapped in pasta and sauce. Even now, baked ziti carries the memory of childhood kitchens filled with steam and the sound of serving spoons scraping the pan. Ham and scalloped potatoes were a creamy, layered casserole that made the entire kitchen smell warm and welcoming. Thin slices of potatoes were stacked with bits of ham and covered in a simple cream sauce before baking until everything turned soft and bubbling. The top browned into a golden crust that gave way to tender layers beneath. Families loved it because it stretched a small amount of ham into a full dinner, something that mattered in households watching their budgets closely. Kids loved the creamy texture. Adults loved the practicality. And the dish itself became a quiet favorite on many dinner tables. Even now, people crave that simple, rich casserole because it tasted like winter nights, steady routines, and the joy of dipping a spoon into something warm after a long day. Salisbury steak with onion gravy was the diner-inspired dinner that made kids feel like they were eating something fancy, even though it was simple ground beef dressed up with seasoning. The patties browned in a pan before being bathed in a glossy onion gravy that simmered until everything soaked up flavor. The smell was deep and savory, filling the kitchen like the inside of a roadside diner. Served with mashed potatoes or vegetables, it felt like a meal made for a special occasion, even on an ordinary night. Kids loved cutting into the steak, adults loved how affordable it was, and everyone loved how satisfying it tasted. Even now, Salisbury steak holds a soft place in people's memories because it represented a treat wrapped in simplicity. Chicken and dumplings were the soft, soothing heart of winter nights, the kind of dish that warmed families from the inside out. A pot of broth simmered with chicken, carrots, and celery until the whole kitchen smelled like comfort itself. Then came the dumplings, dropped in spoonful by spoonful, puffing up into tender, doughy pillows that soaked up every bit of flavor. The steam fogged the windows, the pot bubbled softly, and everyone gathered a little closer to the stove. It was inexpensive, filling, and made with the kind of love that only slow-cooked meals can hold. Pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Stewed oxtails with rice gravy brought deep flavor and slow-cooked richness to Sunday tables across many African American communities. Oxtails, once inexpensive and overlooked, were browned in heavy pots and then simmered for hours with onions, garlic, and spices until the meat turned buttery soft. The braising liquid thickened into a silky gravy that clung to each grain of rice, creating a dish that was equal parts comfort and celebration. Families saved this meal for weekends when everyone could gather because patience was essential and conversation flowed while the pot worked its magic. Children sneaked tastes from wooden spoons, drawn by the savory aroma that filled the house from morning until evening. The humble tale, once discarded by butchers, became a centerpiece of pride and ingenuity. Today, rising prices and faster cooking habits mean fewer people take the time to coax such tenderness from a simple cut of beef, but those who remember the meal speak of it as a perfect union of thrift, skill, and the slow rhythm of family life. Stewed chicken backs were one of those meals that turned scraps into sustenance. In the 1960s, the back of the chicken was considered the cheapest cut, with little meat clinging to the bones. My grandmother bought them in bulk, cleaned them, and simmered them for hours with onions, potatoes, and carrots until the broth grew rich and fragrant. The long cooking softened the bits of meat so they slid easily from the bones, creating a meal that was both filling and flavorful. Families served the stew over rice or with cornbread, stretching the broth even further. The dish carried smoky undertones if she added a ham bone or a splash of fatback, but it was nourishing even without extras. What made it memorable was how something so overlooked could still feel satisfying and dignified at the table. Stewed chicken backs reminded families that nothing should be wasted, and even the smallest scraps could anchor a full dinner. It was a meal of patience, thrift, and creativity, proof that the cheapest part of the bird could still feed a household with warmth and pride. Okra and tomatoes stew was the kind of dish that stretched a garden into a meal. The pot came alive with color, bright reds and deep greens bubbling together, thickened just enough to cling to rice or cornbread. Okra was the backbone, its silky texture giving body to every spoonful, while tomatoes brought the tang that tied everything together. Grandparents made it in the summer when gardens overflowed and nothing went to waste. If you had a little onion, a pinch of salt, and patience, you could feed everyone. The smell drifted through the house, a mix of earthiness and spice that promised something hearty on the table. It wasn't just about taste, it was about gratitude, about pulling something beautiful out of the soil and turning it into sustenance. In lean times, this stew could hold a family steady. Some added smoked sausage when they had it, others kept it purely from the garden. But the feeling it gave was always the same: full, content, cared for. It's a dish that proves comfort doesn't need money, just memory. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge transformed leftover seeds into a hearty meal that supplied both protein and healthy oils. After pumpkins were cooked for pies or stews, the seeds were washed, dried, and pounded into a coarse meal. This meal was simmered slowly in water or thin milk, creating a creamy porridge with a subtle nutty flavor. Sweetened lightly with honey or molasses when available, it became a sustaining breakfast or evening dish that used every part of the harvest. The method reflected West African culinary traditions where ground seeds thickened soups and stews, showing how transplanted knowledge enriched American foodways. Generations after emancipation, pumpkin seed porridge remained a seasonal specialty in some rural areas, appreciated for its nourishing qualities and gentle taste. Modern cooks might recognize it in contemporary seed-based milks and cereals, proving that this centuries-old practice still influences how we eat today. Ground pumpkin seed. Porridge highlights the wisdom of never wasting what nature provides and celebrates a heritage of careful resourcefulness that continues to inspire. Homemade chow-chow relish added brightness and crunch to plates crowded with greens, beans, and smoked meats. Cabbage, onions, peppers, and green tomatoes were chopped fine and simmered with vinegar, mustard seed, and sugar until they formed a tangy condiment that could last through winter. Every household had a slightly different recipe, some sweeter, some hotter, each a reflection of the cook's own hand. The relish brought sharp contrast to rich dishes like pork shoulder or pinto beans, cutting through heaviness with a lively bite. In late summer, neighbors gathered to chop vegetables together, sharing stories as big pots bubbled on outdoor fires. Jars lined pantry shelves in rows of glowing gold and green, a promise of flavor when fresh produce was long gone. Over time, store-bought pickles and bottled sauces replaced the careful preparation of chow-chow, but its memory endures wherever families recall the sound of knives on wooden boards and the reward of a bright spoonful alongside a hearty meal. Cornmeal dumplings in tomato broth were the type of dish that felt simple but filling, carrying both thrift and comfort in every bowl. The broth began with canned or fresh tomatoes, cooked down with onions, garlic, and a touch of seasoning to build a savory base. My grandmother mixed cornmeal with a bit of flour, salt, and water to form small dumplings, dropping them carefully into the bubbling pot. As they simmered, the dumplings softened into tender bites, soaking up the tang of the tomatoes while thickening the stew. The smell alone brought everyone to the kitchen, the blend of corn and tomato promising something hearty without needing meat. Cornmeal was cheap and always on hand, a staple in Black households across the South. Tomato broth was inexpensive too, whether from garden harvests or canned goods bought in bulk. Together, they created a meal that cost next to nothing but filled hungry stomachs with warmth. Cornmeal dumplings in tomato broth turned two of the humblest ingredients into a family staple, proving that frugality and care could produce meals worth remembering. Candied yams with brown sugar and butter were the sunshine of the dinner table. They glistened under the oven light, sweet enough to make children hover close and adults sneak a second spoonful. The yams were sliced thick, bathed in melted butter, brown sugar, and a touch of cinnamon, then baked until the edges caramelized and the syrup turned glossy. It was dessert disguised as a side dish, a holiday tradition that showed up even when times were lean. Sweet potatoes were easy to grow, affordable, and rich in comfort, making them a Southern staple long before store-bought sweets came along. Families treated them like a celebration of resourcefulness, how something grown in the ground could taste like grace itself. On Christmas morning or after church on Sunday, that first bite always tasted like home. No matter who made them, the smell was unmistakable, warm, rich, and heavy with memory. For grandparents, this dish was proof that sweetness could still be found in hard times, and for everyone who came after, it became a symbol of continuity. The taste lingered long after the plates were cleared, a quiet reminder that joy, like brown sugar, can rise out of the simplest things. Wild rice pudding combined indigenous grains with African-inspired preparation to create a dish both nourishing and subtly sweet. Wild rice grew naturally in shallow lakes and slow rivers, and enslaved families near these wetlands harvested the dark grains with paddles and baskets, drying them in the sun for year-round use. Cooked slowly in water until tender, the rice was stirred with a bit of sorghum syrup or honey if available, making a warm pudding that supplied protein and lasting energy. Its nutty flavor and satisfying texture turned a simple bowl into a special treat, especially when fresh fruit or spices could be added. This recipe carried forward after emancipation as African American cooks continued to value wild rice for festive meals and family gatherings. Modern chefs still celebrate its earthy richness, but the story behind wild rice pudding honors the blend of native and African foodways that sustained people through scarcity and created a dessert that is at once humble and deeply rooted in the shared history of America's wetlands and kitchens. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was a clever twist on an old classic that fit the budget of Black families in the 1960s. Instead of pricey white potatoes, sweet potatoes from the garden were boiled, mashed, and spread on top of a filling made from scraps of meat and vegetables. My grandmother would use whatever was left, bits of beef, chicken, or even pork, chopped small and cooked with onions, carrots, or peas until it formed a savory base. The sweet potato topping baked into a golden layer that balanced the salty meat with a touch of natural sweetness. It was hearty enough to fill everyone, but cheap enough to make even during lean weeks. Sweet potatoes were plentiful in many southern gardens, and they stretched farther than most vegetables because they were filling and rich in flavor. Shepherd's pie with mashed sweet potatoes was more than just food. It was a statement of ingenuity. Families made do with what they had and still put something warm and comforting on the table. That golden crust represented thrift and care, carrying both survival and love in every spoonful. Sweet potato pie with brown sugar meringue crowned holiday tables with a beauty that matched its flavor. Smooth, mashed sweet potatoes blended with warm spices created a filling as rich as any custard, poured into a flaky handmade crust. The crowning touch was a cloud of meringue whipped with brown sugar until caramel-scented peaks formed and browned lightly in the oven. Families saved the first slice for honored guests or elders, a sign of respect and affection. The pie carried the sweetness of the southern soil and the skill of generations who knew how to stretch simple ingredients into celebration. Children licked the mixing bowls clean while parents watched the meringue rise, a shared moment of anticipation before the feast. Over time, commercial pies and instant mixes dulled the tradition, but those who remember the warm aroma of brown sugar meringue know that this dessert is more than food. It is a memory of family love, patient hands, and the quiet pride of homemade beauty. Even now, chicken and dumplings can carry someone straight back to a quiet kitchen filled with warmth, safety, and the soft rhythm of family life.